Welcome to the Grow Your Business and Grow Your Wealth podcast with Gary Heldt. Gary is an expert in helping business owners put together a plan that will provide a better future for their businesses, themselves, and their families. On the podcast, Gary interviews other professionals who share his vision, and together they share secrets and strategies any business owner can use to build a better financial foundation for your business and your life.
Welcome back to the podcast, and today we're welcoming back Eido Walny with Walny Legal Group, LLC. And today we're going to talk to Eido about business succession planning. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good, Gary. It's nice to be back on with you.
So last time we talked about estate planning, and obviously there's many areas to go in there. But today, in particular, I want to talk to you about business succession planning. And, tell us, give us your definition of that.
So business succession planning is exactly what the term describes. It's defining and putting some roadmap together for what's going to happen with your business. You can sell your business. You could have children or other family members or even employees inherit the business. Or frankly, you could die holding the business and do nothing with it and let the chips fall where they may. So obviously the last option is, in my opinion, not the best option, but during your lifetime as the business owner, you have the opportunity to plan for the future of the business, and that's what we do.
So when you're talking about plan for the future, so is this like an estate plan? Is it like a business plan? Is it a tax plan? What is it?
I think it's all of the above. I mean, at the end of the day, you want to figure out what's going to happen with your business. Some businesses naturally just wind up. If they are really driven by a certain person, let's say it's a consultant, and that person has a special amount of knowledge and all the customers really see that person as the business. That business, when that person either retires or dies or just stops doing the business, it's going to just end. But a lot of businesses aren't like that. There is continuity. There's value in either a product or a service that can continue beyond the current ownership. And so what we are looking to do with business succession planning is help that business owner or those business owners, if there's more than one, to figure out what the next steps in the life cycle of the business is going to be. And of course, that's going to include some estate planning, because the business for a lot of people is a big part of their estate. You can do business succession planning without doing other estate planning, just as you can do estate planning without doing the business succession planning, but they do go hand in hand in a lot of cases. That's going to include in a lot of times tax planning, because what you do with the business will have tax implications on you and on the business. And so we want to make sure we do a holistic approach so that it ends up working out well for the business and the employees and the owners and whoever's getting that business.
So is this, I'm going to say that, typically, a business owner creates their business plan and it's all great and everything else. They got a nice shiny binder and everything. They put it on the shelf and then they don't ever touch it again. I'm assuming that when you're saying that you're doing this planning, it doesn't fall into that category. It's more like we talked before about with the estate plan, that it's constantly changing and evolving over time.
So the biggest problem with business succession planning is not doing it at all, which is the biggest problem with estate planning as well, right? So at least going through the exercise is a step forward. Certainly, like everything else, if you go through the exercise and put it in a nice shiny binder with 1,000 pages on it, and then you let it accrue cobwebs, that's not doing a whole lot of good for anybody. But, there's a different way to approach the business if you're going to sell it versus transition it to your children versus hold it at death and let your regular estate plan transition it. The best example of this is on the accounting side. Most businesses, when they're in the operational stage, are trying to act in a tax efficient manner. So you want to pay as few taxes as possible during the lifetime of the business. I think this comes as no surprise for anybody. But when you're looking, for example, to sell the business, what buyer is going to want to buy a business showing very little in terms of profitability, because the structure of the business has been such that you're trying to mitigate taxes. So clearly, if you're going to want to sell, you need to change the way you operate the business. But if you're going to pass the business along to, say, your children, then maybe you don't need to go through that exercise. But those are two very different outcomes that are going to very clearly affect the practical operation of your business. And so without direction, you're not going to know which of those paths you're going to want to go down. And so the exercise, well before you actually make a decision to figure out the direction of the business, is an important exercise.
So, you bring up, there being this distinct difference between leaving the business to my kids versus selling. So, and you're absolutely right. I mean, we're constantly trying to maximize the tax deductions and things like that for the owners. So if I'm deciding that, okay, I'm going to sell the business, how far out do I need to really start planning this?
The sooner the better. I generally tell people that if you want to have a good history of profitability, you're going to want to sit down with your lawyer and your accountant and your other financial team, ideally 3 to 5 years out, hopefully more, but at least that much, because it takes time to change the way you operate the business. And then just because you make a decision to change, let's say, the accounting to make sure that you're maximizing profitability instead of tax efficiency, well, now you've got to operate in that system for 3.5 to 4 years in order to generate just 3 tax returns. And, it's not that uncommon for a buyer in a due diligence situation to ask for at least 3 years of tax returns. And so it takes a little bit of lead time like that in order to get your paperwork in place. So 3 to 5 years at a minimum, but more is better. Now, I recognize some business owners, they're just operating to make it to tomorrow. And so 3 to 5 years is a lifetime for them. But if you have the luxury of time on your side, and this is just a glimmer in the back of your head, you give your financial team 3 to 5 years of lead time at a minimum.
Great. Now, what about if it's, family-owned business, mom and dad been running it for years, and now the kids have kind of come up in it and are starting to run the business? Is it more beneficial to have mom and dad sell the business to the kids at once over time, or just leave it to them in their estate?
So when you're talking about transitioning a business to children, there's all sorts of landmines that are in front of you that you've got to navigate carefully. So the first thing that I always tell people is talk to your child or children and see if they're even interested in your business. Maybe you're doing something that you've always thought little Joey or little Annie is going to love to do. And man, this business has been what's paid for their education and their car and their house. And why wouldn't they want to continue this? This has been fantastic. And then you go and ask them, hey, do you have interest in continuing the family business? And the answer is no. My interests are elsewhere. This business has been great for us, but let someone else have it. And all too often that comes as a shock to the system because, the parents have always just assumed that their children are going to want to step in and do it. So step one, talk to your kids. It might even be wise when they're younger to get them involved in the business. Maybe they're really interested in being part of the business or owning it, but they're just terrible at it. And so you want to get them involved and see if they get along with the employees, see if they have the physical and mental capacities to run the business like mom and dad did. That's the next thing. Cycle them through. Some businesses are complicated. Maybe they come in at a low level and start to gain experience. That can become really important. The other landmine is if you've got multiple children, maybe some are interested, some aren't. Maybe the ones that are or aren't very good at certain of the positions and others are. Sometimes there's real estate involved, which is more of a passive investment for the business. And so there's some structuring in terms of active and passive ownership, active and passive management of the real estate. It can get really complicated. And then if you have children who are completely outside of the business, and some children who are involved with the business, how do you compensate the children who are outside of the business in a way that's fair? Maybe the child who's involved in the business, they've had the business handed to them just the same. They weren't involved in the creation of the business or getting the business to a point of success. So they're starting from third base. how do you compensate the children outside of that structure in a fair manner? And there's a lot of different ways to do it. And then, now to get to your question, whether you sell it to them or gift it to them or let them inherit, those have implications too. Oftentimes we see business owners simply hand the keys to the next generation. So the first problem is just doing that in a gifting manner, if the business is worth enough, is going to create gift tax implications. So this has literally happened to me. I've gotten letters from clients or phone calls from clients where they've gotten a letter from the IRS because their business succession plan was one day the sun would rise and the keys to the front door of the business would be on the kitchen table, and their firstborn child Star was now going to be the owner. And that works great until the IRS sees a tax return where one year, mom and dad have all the income, and the next year the child has all the income, and they start asking questions of how this happened. And that business has inherent value, and you made a gift, and there's gift taxes. And so there could be a very significant gift implication there. So you want to be careful about how you do that. But even if you sell it, buy it, whatever, if you've relied as the business owner, mom and dad, you've relied on that business for your own income and probably some of your expenses. If that business is paid for your cell phone and paid for your car and paid for some other expenses that for average Joes might be outside the business expenses. So the day after you transition the business, how are you going to pay those bills? How are you going to meet your own financial commitments after the business? And all too often we see business owners who really haven't thought about that, day 0 - 1 situation. And all of a sudden they panic. And so again, it's very important not just to think about the business in a vacuum, but to think about the wherewithal of yourself to continue financially. What if you sell to your kids and without communicating to them, the structure of the sale is not sustainable for them? Now you've got another problem. And so all of these things really have to be ferreted out, which really just goes back to the point we made earlier, which is communication and planning is really, really important.
Yeah, it sounds like there are a ton of landmines when it comes to this. What about if, we going down this road and you have somebody who has already done this? They've already said, okay, I'm checking out of the business. Here you go, Johnny. Here's the keys. We're letting you kind of run things. Is there a good way to kind of unwind this to get it corrected?
The lawyerly answer is it depends. It depends what's been done. If it's been gifted and things have already happened, sometimes you can salvage things, but if filings have already been made and people have already relied on that transaction, that chip will have already left dock and you're sort of stuck. We often see people try to unwind gifts, and what ends up happening is, yeah, you can do it, but sometimes it requires a gift going back in the other direction, and now you've burned 2 or 3 or 4 people's gift exemptions, and maybe you solve one problem, but you've created 3 new ones. Right. If there's been a transaction, certainly with third parties, because they're not going to be sympathetic to your own errors, but even with kids, that becomes hard. And if the children are married and have kids, oftentimes we see business owners really be lax with transactions with their kids, but they don't think about the fact that that child of yours has a spouse, and that spouse is now part of a new family unit, and they may care a lot about you, mom and dad, but they care about themselves too. And that daughter-in-law or son-in-law, they may care about you a lot, but at the end of the day, you're not their mom and dad. And so they're going to care about their own family unit and their own kids and their own well-being. And that get out of jail free card can be really, really tricky and difficult and have political and financial consequences.
So in the succession planning, passing things on, no matter how you do it, if it's a gift or inherit or anything else, what are the typical ways of valuing the business to be able to know what the gift is or what somebody's going to have to pay?
We really rely on appraisals. We want someone to come in and appraise the business for us. Now, if you've got an outside third party who's made an offer to you, that is very telling as well. And the IRS, for one, always wants to know about things like that. Because at the end of the day, what is an appraisal? An appraisal is an estimate of what an independent third party would come and pay you for the business. I mean, that's the definition of the value of your business. And so if you've had a third party come and do a solicited or unsolicited offer, that's going to be at least part of the appraisal, if not all of the appraisal. But if we don't have that, then what we're asking generally is for an independent accounting or of the business, an actual, formal appraisal. Don't rely on what the accountant told you it was worth for other purposes. You want to get a purposeful valuation of the business. Sometimes we see people get 2 and average them, or 3 and average them. But really, once you get to that point, you've at least got a pretty good sense of the value.
So if someone were to get this valuation done of the business, how long is that valuation good for when we're talking about this? So, because again, if I'm thinking about, getting out of the business and I get the valuation done, but, I got to bring Johnny up to speed to get him ready, and it's 2 or 3 years later, is that valuation that's done, is that still good?
So the answer to that question is that the valuation is good for a shockingly short period of time. So I would say that you can generally rely on the appraisal pretty strongly for about 3 months. By about 6 months, it starts to get stale. By about 12 months, it's not worth very much at all. We all know that over the course of the life cycle of a business, think about the life cycle of the business. In a given quarter, not a whole lot's going to change. Over the course of half a year, a few things could very well change. Over the course of a year, a lot can change. Right. And that's effectively how an appraisal works. It's the quicker you can use it, the better it's going to be in terms of its value. Now, it's not that hard also to update an appraisal. It's not like you're starting all back over. So it's not the end of the world if you need to pay a few more dollars just to get that appraisal refreshed. That is far better money spent than an audit where you have to admit that you relied on a stale appraisal. But to answer your question, what do you do in terms of the planning? You don't need to get the appraisal from day one. Have these conversations, start to do the planning. You have a sense of what the business is worth. It's not going to be, you're not going to think it's worth $1 million and the appraisal is going to tell you it's worth 100 million. Maybe you think it's worth $1 million and it's worth 800,000 or 1.5. That's not going to dramatically change the structure of the business. What it will do is dot the I's and cross the T's. So do most of your planning, get the appraisal done, time it so that it kind of arrives right when you need it. If things go sideways, get it refreshed. Not a big deal.
So what do you do if you have minor children, unmarried, and you have a business, and that person dies? How do you, is this something that, again, we go back to our estate planning that we talked about in our previous, call, or how do you handle that?
Yeah, so the business for a lot of business owners is the largest asset in their estate, whether they've done planning or not. For most lay people, we say their house is their biggest asset, but for almost every business owner, clearly the business is going to be the biggest asset in their estate. So if you don't do planning for the business, that business is simply another asset in your estate, like your house, your car, your investments, everything else you own. Now, this can get dangerous because depending on whether you've done estate planning, and if you haven't done business planning, I think there's a high probability you haven't done estate planning either. Right. Now your business is going to be susceptible to division by the laws of intestacy of your state. Now, if you're married, oftentimes it'll be your spouse who inherits the business. If you've got children, it might be the children. Think about a situation where you've got a business partner and, you've worked with them for 30 years. Now, all of a sudden, that person is partners with your, 18, 20, and 22-year-old children who have never set foot in the business. Right. That's not a happy result. And so, yes, that business could fall into your estate, not to mention the fact that if the business goes through probate is a public forum. So now all of a sudden, all of your business, like the internal business, becomes part of the public domain. And that can just be awful. And so we always try to keep the business out of probate, out of a will. You want to do some more sophisticated planning, at the very least, get it into a trust, revocable or living trust. But the best thing to do, obviously, is business succession planning and avoid all of that.
Right. So, again, it seems like the more we talk about this, the more complicated it gets.
It's an onion.
And obviously we know that, with this planning, there's a cost. And, we've talked before, even offline, about, it's like if people just spend a little bit of money now, it's going to save them so much in the long run. Are you able to tell us kind of whatever, it's a 4-to-1 type thing? It's like, whatever you spend, the $5,000 now is probably going to save you 20 grand later. I mean, do you have a sense for kind of, and I know it depends on the business size, but kind of a ratio to that?
So I often tell people that the cost of avoiding a problem is about 1/10 of the cost of fixing a problem once the problem is developed. For business owners, when you're talking about business transition, it almost becomes immeasurable, because what is the value to that business owner who spent a lifetime developing that business to avoid the business going bankrupt or falling into disrepair or just blowing up, or having your partner just leave and starting a mirror business and stealing all the clients away? To me, as a business owner myself, and frankly, as the son of a business owner, that to me is immeasurable in terms of its value. But in terms of absolute dollars and cents, my rule that I generally tell clients is 10-to-1. The value of avoiding a problem versus paying to fix it is 1/10.
Now, if you sat down with somebody, and I know that if you did business succession planning with somebody, you would also be doing estate planning. Kind of, what is the time frame, length of time? Kind of like, okay, here, you and I talk, today, and we start talking about stuff. So from that point to the plan being done, what is the length of this process? And I mean, obviously, I know there's, depends on how long I get you documents and give you all the information and stuff like that. But if somebody were to kind of, what's the average time?
So this probably doesn't come as a shock that most business owners are not super motivated about these things, right? I say this again, I'm a 3rd-generation entrepreneur. Both of my grandfathers own businesses. My dad owns a business. I own a business. As a business owner, you focus on your business. The reason you're in that business is you're good at it. Now, oftentimes problems arise and you band-aid the situation and you do what you need to do to get to tomorrow, next week, next month. Now here comes a lawyer or an accountant or a business consultant who says, well, now you have to do this other thing. You've got to plan for what life is going to be like after you. Not surprisingly, not a lot of business owners are super motivated by that. They're trying to just get to tomorrow.
Right.
So the practical answer to that is I tell people, I know what the mental, the mental take from business owners is of this stuff. And so usually from a practical perspective, you're looking at about a year all in. Now, that's not taking a year because of me. If you just sat down with me, or frankly, any lawyer, accountant, business consultant, whatever, they can do it fairly quickly if there's a high level of back and forth and cooperation. But realistically, unless there is some driving motivation, right? The business owner has just won the lottery and they don't care and they just want to get out. Or they've got a terminal condition and they just need to turn the business over. That's different, because now there's an external motivation that's pushing things artificially fast. But if you've got a regular chugging along business with a regular chugging along kind of business owner, about a year is what I find it takes from the time that they first call me and say, we should talk about this, to the point where there's a plan and really some execution. It's about a year. And, you've got to weave in these conversations with children and spouses. If there's a sale, you're talking to the CPA and a broker, and what do you think I can get? And how do you think I should do this? Is it a stock sale, an asset sale? What about the real estate? There's a lot of conversations. There's not a magic check the box, legal Zoom where you check a few boxes and magically there's an answer. It just doesn't work like that. So practically speaking, give it about 12 months start to finish.
So obviously we've talked about a ton of landmines and different things that can go wrong. And I mean, obviously this is really, a big reason to have a professional like you who knows what you're talking about to step in and do this. What are some other reasons why it's so important to have a professional like you help with this business succession planning?
I mean, I think all the reasons that we just talked about. I mean, the biggest problem is that you just don't know what you don't know. There's so much that can go wrong. Oftentimes from the example I gave earlier, where the business owner simply said, my business succession plan is going to be that one day these keys are going to be on the kitchen table. And that's literally what happened. Literally.
Yeah.
That sounds great. That's so idealistic. But they didn't realize that you just can't do that. I mean, the business was worth so much that created a tax situation. Now, in their mind, what did I do? I left keys on a table. How could that generate, I think it was like $2.5 million in tax? The mere act of me putting keys on the table, $2.5 million, that's outrageous. Well, it is until you start to really unwind what the implications of what you did really were. And so how was that person supposed to know? Again, they're a widget maker, right? They're good at making widgets and they just don't know these tax consequences. Perhaps if they're lucky, they'll go through something like this twice in their lifetime. That's not a whole lot of experience at all, but people who are professionals are doing this dozens of times a year. They've seen these landmines. They've seen how people react or don't react. They know what the tax consequences are. They can see through the idealistic, I want to just do this and be done, and ask the kinds of important questions that are going to make you think and finally get to a good result for you, for whoever eventually deals with the business, and ultimately for the business itself. I mean, let's not lose sight of the fact that, for a lot of business owners, that business is like a baby to them. They started it or inherited it at point A and put blood, sweat, and tears into it and got it to this point where it's at today. And to think about blowing that up or hurting it or wrecking it would be just like hurting their own children. And so if they make bad decisions that cause that, it's going to cause them emotional pain and harm, and certainly financial harm. And so they don't want that. And so that's why hiring a professional who can guide them through these various landmines so that they don't have to learn by stepping on the landmines, it's worth every penny you're going to pay these professionals.
Yeah, just like our podcast, grow your business and grow your wealth. Let's not give it back to Uncle Sam after you do that, because like you're saying, it's like, we've spent all these years growing it and everything else, and you don't want to make the mistake of passing it on in the wrong way. It's always, I always say, it's not how much money you make, it's how much you get to keep. And if you're not prudent in your planning, then that's what's going to happen.
Absolutely.
So any parting words that you have for our listeners, besides plan? Yeah,
I was just going to say that the biggest statistic that shocks people when I talk about estate planning is that about 60 to 70% of people in the US have no estate plan at all. Nothing. The number amongst business owners who don't have a viable business succession plan has to be at least that high, if not higher. I wouldn't be shocked. I don't know exactly what the statistic is, but if it were 80%, that wouldn't shock me at all. And based on what we've just talked about, it is not the kind of thing that you can wake up one morning and expect that by Friday you're going to have the answers. This is a process. Some aspects of the process are literally going to take years if the right set of circumstances present themselves. So I would say that, there's no better time than sooner than later to get the process started. You want to be able to make decisions in a manner that is not forced. Don't wait until a buyer has materialized and is pressuring you to sell. Don't wait until there's a divorce brewing in the family, whether it's yours or your partner's or whoever's. Don't wait until the doctor gives you really bad news and now you're scrambling. You
Right.
want to make these decisions with clear conscience, where you don't know if you're going to be a buyer or a seller, so that you can make good decisions. And so the sooner you can do it, the better. Now, it doesn't have to be day one, because again, I know a lot of attorneys and accountants who say this should be as important to you as organizing the business on day one. I think that's false, because if you don't have a successful business, maybe failure is your business succession plan. So get the business running, but once you have something brewing and once you really have that baby growing, sit down. If you've got a partner, a spouse, family members, whatever the case may be, get your financial team together and just start having these conversations. Let it go slow. Let it unfold naturally. Don't do it in a forced manner. Far and away, that's how you're going to get the best results.
Great. So again, everybody's hearing you for the second time now, but still let us know what if somebody wants to reach out to you and talk to you and get you to help them, how do they reach out to you?
Yeah, you can go to our website, walnylegal.com. You can follow us on Twitter at Walny Legal Group, or give us a call, 414-751-7531. We're very interactive. Every call, every email gets answered. We'd be happy to help in any which way we can, even if it means just giving some advice and not charging you $1.
Great. So today our guest has been Eido Walny with Walny Legal Group, and we appreciate all your wise words.
Thanks, Gary. Always a pleasure.
This show has been produced by Market Domination, LLC. To discover how you can have your own show completely done for you and turn it into a real published book and become the authority in your marketplace, go to www.marketdominationllc.com/podcast offer.